Hey guys, how's it going? My name is John. Welcome to my Gamester81 show. This episode I'll be reviewing the very rare SimCity 64 for the Nintendo 64DD. And it's actually one of the worst selling systems of all time for Nintendo. In fact, it is the worst selling system of all time, including the Virtual Boy. In fact, this system makes the Virtual Boy sales look like the NES sales for sure. Now I'm going to review the SimCity 64 game for this system. There are only 10 games that came out. Actually, technically 9 games. One of them was the RANet online, so you can go online and stuff. But there's only 9 programs officially released for the disk drive. I have 8 of those in front of me. I'll review the later ones on later videos. Now, one really cool thing is I'm a huge fan of Mario Paint for the Super Nintendo. Well, Nintendo actually released a sequel to Mario Paint. It's actually a series of games called Mario Artists. There are actually 4 of them released. I have all 4. And what's cool is you can, through the RANet, through the online, you can actually share videos, create your own artwork. And it was actually a pretty big deal, considering almost 40% of the games or programs for the system were Mario Artist games. Before I dive into SimCity 64's gameplay and show you the review and how the game plays, I do want to talk about the Nintendo 64 disk drive because it is kind of fascinating. Because Nintendo, it seemed like they had planned the system for a while. It officially came out December 1st, 1999, but they started talking about the system back in 1995. In fact, if you take your Nintendo 64 and you look at the very bottom of it, this is not screwed on, so let me just show you the bottom. There's actually an expansion port here. And I always wondered when I first got my Nintendo 64 system, I'm like, wow, that's interesting. Any other rumors that could have been for a CD system expansion module or whatever, but ended up being for the disk drive. And I recall looking at the magazines at the time, the Nintendo Power, the Electric Gaming Monthly, the Game Pro magazines, for example, and they were talking about the newest Zelda game coming out for the 64. And that game ended up being Ocarina of Time, one of the best games of all time. But initially, it was actually supposed to come out for the disk drive. In fact, so was Mother 3 and a whole bunch of other great games. But unfortunately, only 10 games came out total, and that's really unfortunate. And unfortunately, the system had a very short shelf life, lasting only a 1.5 to 2 years. And in that time, they only sold 10,000 to 15,000 systems, which is really, really poor. And a big part of that is because I think Nintendo saw the writing on the wall. When they were going to release the system, they were actually kind of pulled the plug. They backed away from it a lot. And they had partnered with a company called RANet in Japan, which was kind of an online company. And they had partnered with them. And the idea was that they were going to create these games that you could basically rewrite and play online. And so basically the N64 disk drive for the majority of its life was only available through mail order through the RANet services. So towards the very end of the lifespan of the Nintendo 64 disk drive, Nintendo decided to release some systems in stores, but for the most part, you only do mail order through these. And then what they would do, they would ship you these games every couple months. And there was actually a $25 service fee to play these games online. So at the time, it was pretty advanced. You can play online, you can share files, one of the reasons why Nintendo wanted to do a disc, and I'll show you what that looks like. It looks like a zip disk. This actually opens up, and this is actually what it looks like. And one of the benefits of having this is it has more memory than your typical cartridge. So, for example, Mario 64 for the 64 actually has only 4 megabytes of memory. This can actually store up to 64 megabytes. Now, that seems like a lot, but when you consider a CD-based system like the PlayStation 1 or what have you at the time, those actually could store up to 650 megabytes of memory and were a lot cheaper to produce. So kind of scratched my head as far as why Nintendo wanted to do this, but nonetheless, it was a failure. There are some good games. The game I'm going to show you, SimCity 64, is probably the best game for the system. Doshin the Giant, actually a pretty fun game. So without any further ado, let's take a closer look at the game itself. Let me know what you guys think of the game. Let me know what you guys think of the Nintendo 64 disk drive. And thanks for watching. Appreciate you guys liking this video. And of course, thanks for subscribing. So when you turn on the N64 disk drive, you got to make sure that there's no cartridge on the very top. The nice thing about the disk drive also is it doesn't have a separate power supply. It actually takes the power from the Nintendo 64. And if you guys are curious, this will work on North American NTSC N64s. I'm not really quite sure if it will work on PAL, but I would imagine it probably will. And this was actually developed by HAL Laboratories, which HAL is more known for the Kirby games. He also worked with Super Smash Brothers, that series of games. And don't confuse SimCity 64 with SimCity 2000, which did come out for the Nintendo 64. The idea is very, very similar, but this is a different team that worked on this, and graphically it looks a lot different. This is Dr. Wright. You may recognize him from SimCity for the Super Nintendo. That's why this is kind of a direct sequel, I suppose. And what he does is he gives you advice and and kind of tells you what's going on in the city. Obviously, this is in Japanese. I really don't understand what he's telling me. He could be telling me that the city's burning down as far as I'm concerned. I really don't know. But it's definitely nice to have him as far as if you can understand what he's saying for sure, because he'll tell you kind of what the citizens are thinking, what's going on, what the council is thinking in the city as well. And here it is. You can move around. You can also kind of use the yellow buttons of the controller to kind of zoom around and see what's going on. And if you've never played a SimCity game before, the object is basically to build a city. So you can control if you build residential, which is in this case I'm going to build some houses. You can build industrial, commercial. You have to control how many police stations, fire departments, schools, parks, even the sewer and electricity. You control everything part of the city. You control taxes. You can actually control the speed of how fast things go by. And what's really cool about this SimCity 64 is the very first one where it has street level, which I'll show you here in a second. And it's also the very first SimCity game to have nighttime, which I'll also show you here later in the video. I believe SimCity 4 has nighttime as well, but this is the first one to do that. There's a lot of things going on you have to control. You got to make sure the residents are happy. You have to watch out for natural disasters. I remember in SimCity for the Super Nintendo, Bowser was one of the natural disasters. He'd actually come through and he could destroy your city, kind of like Godzilla. It's pretty funny, and that was the only SimCity game to really feature that, of course. But this was actually not only by HAL Laboratories, but Maxis, which is owned by EA, Electronic Arts, also worked on this game as well. If you push the yellow C buttons on the Nintendo 64 controller, you can control the different angles of the city, how far you zoom in. You can zoom all the way out as well, and it's definitely helpful. You can build land, you can build lakes. Everything takes money, of course, but if you zoom in close enough, this is the street level. You gotta be careful because sometimes if you can get trapped between buildings, as is the case here. But I think this is a really clever idea. You can actually go street level and talk to people and get their feedback. There's some random animals every once in a while you talk to, like there's like a gopher or something like that in the city as well, kind of random. There he is. That's the gopher right there. And you can get feedback. They'll tell you kind of what's going on in the city. Obviously, it's all in Japanese, but this is a really clever idea. The controls here are a little tricky because you only have the one directional pad, so it's kind of moving around, but pretty cool. So you can imagine once you build a major city with a big downtown, for example, it's kind of cool, and you actually see how the sun is actually coming down for the nightlife. And here we are approaching dusk, and the sun is starting to set. And I just think, just graphically, it's super cool. And one thing about this disc drive I forgot to mention almost is that the audio is a little bit enhanced as well. I think the music in this game is really, really well done, and one of the better music soundtracks for a SimCity game. But here, yeah, the sun is setting and it's starting to get dark. I think this is just a really, really cool and unique feature of the game. And as it gets dark, crime will go up, of course, but you can combat that with police stations. And there, the lights pop on for the city. And once you build a big downtown, it looks really, really cool. And people will give you feedback. There's the moon. But overall, yeah, this is a really interesting and very obscure SimCity game. I'm a big fan of the series for SimCity. Let me know what you guys think. If you guys want to stay in touch, you can certainly follow me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, as well as my website, Gamester81.com. For those who are interested, I do have t-shirts available, which help support the show as well at chopshopgoods.com. Many of you guys have asked about those. And appreciate you guys watching, and thanks for subscribing. See you guys soon. Take care, and game on.